My name is Dr. Michael Chen, and for the past 8 years, I've been living a double life. On the surface, I'm a respected cardiologist at one of the nation's top hospitals. I have a good salary, a nice house, and colleagues who respect me. But underneath that respectable exterior, I carry a secret that's eaten away at me every single day. I'm not the person you think I am. This is the story of how I stole someone's life work, how I destroyed a young researcher's career, and how I spent years trying to bury the truth. But the truth, as they say, has a way of surfacing. Let me take you back to 2015. I was 42 years old. I'd been at Metropolitan Hospital for 12 years. I was a competent surgeon, not brilliant, but competent. I published regularly. I had a team of research assistants. I was climbing the ladder. But something was happening at the hospital. There was a new initiative, a push to develop a revolutionary treatment for arrhythmia. The hospital wanted to be on the cutting edge. They were pouring funding into it, millions of dollars. The problem was, I didn't have a groundbreaking idea. I had a competent idea. A good idea, but not the kind of idea that gets published in Nature or The Lancet. Not the kind of idea that gets you on the cover of medical journals. Not the kind of idea that makes you famous. I was facing a career plateau, and I knew it. In June 2015, a young man named Dr. David Okafor was hired as my research assistant. David was exceptional. He was 27 years old, fresh out of his PhD program at Stanford. He was brilliant. The kind of brilliant that makes you uncomfortable because you know you'll never be that smart. David had this way of seeing problems that other people didn't. He'd come into my office with an idea written on a napkin, and I'd think, how did he even come up with that? Within 2 months, David had developed a novel approach to treating atrial fibrillation. It involved a combination of genetic screening and a new kind of catheter ablation technique that was, well, it was genius. I remember the first time he explained it to me. He used the whiteboard in my office, drawing diagrams, walking me through the theory. I watched him, and I felt two things simultaneously: awe at his brilliance and a creeping sense of dread. Because I knew what this research could do. I knew it could be career-defining. I knew it could be revolutionary. And I knew that David's name would be the primary author, not mine. That night, I went home and couldn't sleep. My wife asked me what was wrong. I told her I was thinking about the research. She said, "That's good. You should be excited." But I wasn't excited. I was terrified. I thought about David presenting this research. I thought about him giving talks at conferences. I thought about him being offered positions at better hospitals. I thought about him becoming famous while I remained competent. By 3 a.m. I'd made a decision. A decision I would spend the next 8 years regretting. I was going to make sure that when this research was published, my name was on top. The next Monday, I called David into my office. I told him his work was remarkable. I told him I wanted to be more involved in the research. I said I wanted to refine the methodology further. What I actually did was position myself as a full collaborator. Here's how I did it. I told David that he needed oversight. I said that his ideas were brilliant, but they needed structure. I said that I had the experience to help him publish this properly, to navigate the peer review process, to position it for maximum impact. David was grateful. He was young. He respected me. He trusted me. I began attending every research meeting. I read every paper he wrote, every protocol he developed. I absorbed his ideas like a sponge. And then I started making small suggestions, not in a way that contradicted his work, that would have raised red flags, but in ways that gradually shifted the research in directions I suggested. What if we looked at the genetic component differently? I'd ask. What if we tested this in a different patient population? David would take these suggestions and run with them, and they would work, because he was brilliant, and even my mediocre suggestions could be transformed into something valuable by his mind. But gradually I was inserting myself into the narrative of the research. I was becoming a real collaborator, not just an overseer. By early 2016, we were ready to submit our first paper. David had written the entire thing. He'd designed every experiment. He'd analyzed every data point. He'd drawn every conclusion. I read the draft and it was perfect. It was exactly the kind of paper that would get published in a top-tier journal. David wanted to submit it with himself as the primary author and me as a secondary author. That was the standard arrangement. That's what we should have done. I told him I had a better idea. I said, "David, you're at a critical point in your career. You need to think about your future. Right now, you're my research assistant. If you publish this as the primary author at this point in your career, you'll be locked into being an assistant. But what if we publish this with me as the primary author and you as the second?" David looked confused. He said, "But this is my research." I said, "Exactly. And I want to help you position yourself for success. Trust me, I know the politics of publishing. If you're the primary author on your first major publication while you're still a research assistant, people will think you need supervision. But if I'm the primary author, and you're clearly the driving force behind it, which any expert will see, then people will think you're a researcher, working with institutional support. Do you understand the difference? David didn't understand, because what I was saying didn't make sense. But he was young, and he trusted me, and I was his superior. He said, I guess, if you think that's better. I changed the author order. I became the primary author. David became secondary. I submitted the paper. 3 months later, we got accepted to The Lancet, one of the top medical journals in the world. The paper was titled, A Novel Genetic Pharmacological Approach to Atrial Fibrillation Treatment by M. Chen, D. Okafor, et al. When I saw my name in print as the primary author, I felt something unexpected. Not triumph, but revulsion. But I pushed that feeling away. The paper started getting attention. The hospital administration noticed. My colleagues noticed. Medical journals started citing it. The hospital's chief of surgery called me into his office. He congratulated me. He said this kind of research was exactly what the hospital wanted to be known for. He said I was doing important work. He offered me a promotion, Director of Cardiac Research. More money, more prestige, a larger budget, more resources. I accepted immediately. David didn't get a promotion. He remained my research assistant. But now I had more control over him than ever. What happened next was the part I'm least proud of. The consolidation of power, 1900 to 2200. I made sure that all future research projects came through me. I controlled which journals we submitted to. I controlled how research was presented at conferences. I controlled David's professional development. When other researchers wanted to collaborate with David, I positioned myself as the mandatory intermediary. If someone in the hospital wanted to work with David, they had to go through me. I was isolating him. Deliberately. David noticed. I could see it in his face when he'd pitch ideas. There was less enthusiasm, less trust, but I'd gotten a taste of something. Recognition, prestige, institutional power, and I wasn't going to give it up. Over the next year, we published 3 more papers, all with me as the primary author, all using David's ideas with my direction. David's resentment grew. I could see it, but I told myself it was just jealousy. I told myself he was upset that he wasn't getting more recognition, and that was his problem. I didn't acknowledge that I was the one preventing him from getting recognition. By 2017, the situation had become unbearable. David was brilliant work for someone who got almost no recognition, and I was getting all the recognition for work I barely understood. One day, David came into my office. It was a Friday afternoon. He looked exhausted. He said, Dr. Chen, I need to talk to you about the author order. My stomach dropped. He continued. The latest paper, the one we're about to submit, I designed the entire protocol. I conducted the experiments. I analyzed the data. I wrote the first draft. And my name is going to be second. I said, David, we've talked about this. The author order reflects scientific leadership and institutional hierarchy. He said, no, it reflects you taking credit for my work. The word taking hung in the air between us. I said, that's not fair. I've guided this research. I've provided direction. I've helped you navigate the publication process. He said, you've provided direction that happens to be exactly what I was already thinking. You've helped by taking my name off my own papers. Then he did something that terrified me. He pulled out his phone. He showed me a series of text messages he'd sent to himself. Dated messages, where he described his ideas before bringing them to me. He showed me his original research notes. He showed me the timeline of his work. He said, I have documentation of every idea, every experiment, every conclusion. All of it is mine. I felt my face go hot. I said, if you feel that way, perhaps you should find another research advisor. It was a threat. We both knew it. David looked at me for a long moment. Then he said, maybe I will. He left my office. I panicked, not out of guilt, but out of fear. David had documented his work. He could potentially blow this whole thing open. I needed to protect myself. The next day, I called a meeting with hospital administration. I told them that David's work had been overseen by me, but that he was becoming difficult to manage. I said he was claiming credit for work that was collaborative. I said he was being ungrateful and entitled. I suggested that we should distance ourselves from his research. I suggested that his involvement had made him less objective. I suggested that we might want to consider having him reassigned to a different department. The administration was sympathetic. After all, I was a director now. I had authority. I had credibility. Within 2 weeks, David was reassigned to a different team. A team that wasn't doing research. A team that was doing routine clinical work. His position was essentially a demotion. He filed a complaint with the hospital's ombudsman. He said he was being retaliated against for questioning authorship credits. The ombudsman investigated. I was asked to provide documentation of my involvement in the research. I provided emails where I had offered guidance. I provided notes where I had made suggestions. I provided my own spin on what had happened. David provided his documentation, but the ombudsman said it was a quote, professional dispute about collaboration. The ombudsman said that author order was often a matter of institutional politics. The ombudsman did not support David's complaint.